Good evening, class. This is Mrs. Streeter with your third Flip Classroom lesson. You've done this before. You did it with Flipgrid, Blend Space, and now you're doing it again, different platform, which shows your flexibility. So, yay for you. This one is on African religions. It says 7G4. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we do that, I'm going to answer your question because I know how you all are. Why a flipped classroom, Ms. Streeter? Well, let's look at flipped classroom versus traditional classrooms. In a traditional classroom, like so, the teacher instructs. That can also take the form of personalized learning, stations, choice and voice, so on and so forth. Students are taking notes, following guided instruction. We give an assessment, such as a quiz or a test, and we give you some homework in a traditional classroom setting. Now let's look over here at a flipped classroom setting. Teacher instructs the lesson at home, also known as a mini lesson, in the form of a video, podcast, book, website, Flipgrid, Blend Space, or like what we're doing tonight. Could also be in a OneNote in your class notebook. All right. And then you come in class and you do work in class. Now, the benefit of a flipped classroom is it allows us to get to the meat and potatoes at home so that when you come to class, I can help you develop a deeper understanding of concepts, applications, and connections to content that we're speaking of, which in this case is going to be about the diverse religious groups. With that said, you'll be able to ask questions, we'll be able to have discussion, and be able to make sure that you get a little bit more support. Okay. So, in sum, in a traditional classroom, you have your lecture that takes place in the classroom or personalized learning options, choice and voice, various strategies, lots of different avenues for success in the classroom. And then you have your homework 1, 2, 3 times a week. But in a flipped classroom setting, you get your lecture or your mini lesson at home, like now. And research shows there's not any instructional time lost by you being at home. So even with siblings, the research supports being able to get this done efficiently at home and come in the classroom and participate in activities where the teacher can facilitate and actually help you develop a deeper appreciation and meaning, make some meaning of what it is that you actually had your mini lesson on the night before or the 2 days before. In this case, it'll be the night before. So those are the reasons why a flipped class is beneficial. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, we've been on standard SS7G4 or G4, as I so affectionately refer to it as, which is analyzing the diverse cultural characteristics of the people who live in Africa for a couple of weeks now. We have already pre-test element A, which says explain the differences between the ethnic group and religious group. You were exposed to ethnic groups and religious groups on last semester. You are very familiar with, based on the pretest data, you're very familiar with the difference between the ethnic group and religious group. We only had maybe 5 or 6 that were near mastery on that, and everyone else had mastered it for the most part. And so we're going to focus on element B, which is describe the diversity of religions within African ethnic groups. And those ethnic groups that we're going to use for a point of reference are Bantu, Ashanti, and Swahili. And so we're going to talk about the different types of religious groups. And there are a few. So we'll go ahead and get started. Now, we spoke in depth about Islam and Christianity because they were also the two predominant religions in the Middle East. And so we're going to touch on them, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them because they overlap in geography, environment, culture, history, government, and economics for Southwest Asia. So we're pretty good on those two, but we will discuss how they came to Africa. We'll spend the the most of our time on traditional African religions. There are three, and we will talk more about those than Islam and Christianity. And that, again, is because we spent 4 months with a lot of overlap on all of the subunits with Islam and Christianity. Okay, so to start, let's look at an African religion diversity map. That's the title. Okay, that's what you always look for when you're analyzing a chart, graph, any type of map, um, any pie chart, anything, with an image on it. You always look for the title. And then you can divide it up into four with your eyes and analyze it in quadrants. You always want to look at your key and you want to look at your symbols and see what they represent. Okay, so I'll give you a moment to do that. Okay, and so from looking at this map, from the title, we know that it's about religion diversity. And so from looking at the key and the symbols, we know that it's about Christianity, Islam, traditional religions, and even Hinduism. And so we can see that most of the North and some of the East Coast are predominantly Islam in terms of their faith, or we could say Muslim for the follower. Okay, so we could say that they're Muslims. Um, we can also say that starting in the Sahel, slightly in the Savannah region, or the central portion of Africa, all the way down, or using cardinal directions, south to the furthest tip of South Africa is predominantly Christianity. And we have to say predominantly because even though we don't see anything else there, there's something else there. And the same with Islam as well. Now, the darker portion says traditional religions, and it only has one place really highlighted for that. And then you have a little speck over here off to the coast, little island for Hinduism. Okay. Oh, and we can't forget about the northern tip of Madagascar, in terms of Islam. But anyway, the something else that's there when it comes to Christianity and Islam that we don't see is that underneath those are traditional religions that have been interwoven throughout those two dominant religions. And we're going to get to that in just a moment. Okay, we're going to look at Islam. Now, how did Islam come to Africa? Okay, and it came there and affected a large part of their population. We can see that here. Let's take a few seconds to kind of look over the map and then look at the key, the symbols, and see what it represents. Okay, so by looking at the key, we can see that it tells a percentage of the Muslim population. And we can look at the symbols and tell that the color gives us a clue as to what percentage of the population is represented in the various parts of Africa. We know that Africa has 54 countries. And so by looking at this again, we can't help but see that the darkest portion, darkest green, represents the large majority, 70 to 100% of people that make up a Muslim population in Africa. All right. And then going on down here to the coral, that's your 0 to 9%, which means it has the least amount of Muslim population. So South Africa, Angola, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Madagascar, Kenya, they all have the least amount of Muslim population. And we know that because looking at the previous map, we could see that they were predominantly Christian. But again, there's something else interwoven, and that's your traditional African religions. We can see that over here on the coast, which is your lighter green in Tanzania, that's your Swahili ethnic group name, so for the people of the coast. And this is also influenced, they are also